He had not been touched in 13 years. Not by doctors. Not by lovers. Not by anyone who wanted to live past sunrise. Seo Hwan-jin was the most feared man in Seoul, the kind of name people whispered in dark hallways and never repeated twice. And yet, one woman walked into his world, looked straight into the wreckage of him, and said, "Your body is not what's broken. Your heart is." Loveth Okafor did not come to Seoul to fall in love. She came to heal a man who didn't believe he could be healed. But the deeper she pressed into his wounds, the more dangerous everything became. Because healing Hwan-jin meant uncovering a secret that powerful people had buried in blood, a secret connected to her own father's past. Now someone wants her dead. And the only man who can protect her is the same man she is slowly, dangerously, irrevocably healing. Stay with me until the end. You will not regret it. The first time Seo Hwan-jin allowed Loveth Okafor to touch his shoulder without flinching, it was raining. It was a Tuesday, 3 weeks and 2 days into their sessions, and the room smelled like cedarwood and antiseptic, and something quieter beneath both, something she had started to recognize as him. She did not announce what she was about to do. She had learned early that announcements made him seize up, made his jaw lock and his body go to war with itself. So instead she did what she always did. She moved slowly. She breathed audibly so he could track her, and she let her fingers rest against the joint where his neck curved into his shoulder. She expected the grab. She expected the rage, the low warning in his throat, the flash of something feral behind his eyes. Instead, Hwan-jin sat very still. His hands were on his knees. His knuckles were not white. His breathing was controlled, deliberate. She had taught him that, for sessions ago, when he finally stopped pretending the breathing exercises were beneath him. Loveth pressed gently. She felt the knot of tension, years of it, compressed into that one point like a stone that had been forming since the world was young. She began to work, circular, patient, measured. He said nothing. She said nothing. Outside, the rain hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse in shifting sheets. Somewhere below, Seoul was alive and indifferent. Up here, in this room that cost more per month than her annual salary back in Lagos, two people were existing inside something that neither of them had a word for yet. After 4 minutes, she counted. Hwan-jin exhaled. It was the sound of something releasing. Not breaking. Releasing. The way a fist unclenches after holding on so long that the person forgot they were holding on at all. Loveth felt it travel through her fingertips, that exhale. Felt it move through her palm and up her wrist and settle somewhere behind her sternum. She kept working. He let her. They did not speak for a long time, and when they finally did, it was Hwan-jin who broke the silence. "You are not afraid of me," he said. It was not a question. It carried the tone of a man still trying to understand a fact that refused to make sense. "I know what fear looks like," Loveth replied. "I also know what pain hiding as danger looks like. You're not the first one." A pause. His shoulders shifted barely. She adjusted. "Most people cannot tell the difference," he said. "Most people have not spent 8 years in trauma rehabilitation." She moved her fingers to a new point, testing. "Tilt your head slightly to the left for me." He did. It was such a small thing, tilting his head. He had given orders that moved armies. He had made decisions that reshaped the underground economy of 3 districts. And yet, in this room, tilting his head on the instruction of a 31-year-old Nigerian woman from Enugu felt like the most significant act of surrender he had performed in over a decade. He did not examine that thought too closely. Not yet. Loveth finished the session 12 minutes later. She made a note in her tablet. She did not make a production of the milestone they had just crossed, and he appreciated that more than she knew. If she had smiled too widely, said something congratulatory, treated the moment like a trophy, he would have pulled back. He understood himself that much. Instead, she simply said, "Same time Thursday," and began packing her equipment. Hwan-jin watched her from the chair. "You live far from here." She glanced up. "Mapo District." "What?" "I will have a driver take you." Loveth looked at him with the expression he was starting to catalog, the one that meant she was deciding whether to argue. She had many expressions. He had begun, without intending to, memorizing all of them. "I have legs," she said. "It is raining. I have an umbrella." "Loveth." His voice dropped the way it did when he was not giving a suggestion anymore. She held the look for 3 more seconds. Then she sighed, which was different from surrendering. He was also learning the difference. "Fine," she said. But tell your driver not to talk to me. I need to decompress after our sessions." He almost said something that would have embarrassed him. He pressed his lips together instead and reached for his phone. She left. Hwan-jin sat alone in the room that smelled like cedar wood and something quieter, and he pressed his own hand to the shoulder she had touched. The pain was still there, but it was a different kind of pain now. The kind that meant something was waking up instead of dying. He was not sure which frightened him more. Ma Rojin was waiting in the study when Hwan-jin emerged. His right-hand man was impossible to surprise. He had the particular stillness of someone who had grown up needing to read rooms before entering them, a quality that made him invaluable and occasionally unsettling. "How was the session?" Rojin asked, not looking up from the reports spread across the desk. "Productive." Rojin looked up. He had known Hwan-jin for 19 years. He knew exactly what productive meant in this context, because he knew every other way that word had been used and what it had never meant until now. In the first week, productive had meant Hwan-jin sat in the room for the full duration without throwing anyone out. In the second week, it had meant he completed 2 of the 3 movement exercises without shutting the session down entirely. In the third week, until today, it had meant approximately nothing because Rojin had been watching through the behavioral shifts the way a physician monitors vitals. Hoping for improvement and dreading the morning, he found none. He said nothing. He returned to his reports. But when Hwan-jin walked past, Rojin allowed himself one small, private exhale of relief. He thought about the day he had first brought the proposal to Hwan-jin, sitting in this same study, laying out the case for a rehabilitation specialist with the careful, methodical logic of a man who knew that leading with emotion would get the idea rejected before he finished the sentence. He had presented it as operational necessity. He had cited the shoulder's effect on response time, on combat readiness, on the perception of strength that their position required. He had said nothing about the 13 years. He had said nothing about Jiho. He had said nothing about the fact that watching his boss flinch from the incidental brush of a sleeve against his arm in a crowded doorway had become something Rojin carried around like a stone in his chest. Hwan-jin had listened to the entire operational case and then said, very quietly, "Find someone who will not be frightened of me." Rojin had found Loveth Okafor. He had read her file for 3 hours before approaching her. Trauma-informed rehabilitation. 8 years of clinical practice. 3 years in conflict zones. A woman who had helped a rebel commander in the DRC recover the use of his dominant hand after a wound that 3 other specialists had declared permanent. A woman who, in the testimonials from her clients, appeared again and again as someone who did not flinch, who did not manage from a distance, who moved toward difficulty with the calmness of someone who had already made peace with the possibility that it might not resolve. He had offered her double her standard rate. She had asked him to tell her the full clinical picture before she named a number. He had liked her immediately. Now he allowed himself that single exhale, returned to his reports, and did not mention any of it when Hwan-jin walked past. The next morning, Hwan-jin attended a meeting he had been dreading. It was held in the private dining room of a restaurant that publicly sold premium Korean beef and privately laundered enough money to fund a small country's education budget. 3 other men sat at the table. Men of consequence. Men who had built their power the way he had built his, through years of violence and strategy and the careful, merciless elimination of anyone who stood between them and what they wanted. The discussion was about territory, about a shipment that had been intercepted, about pressure from a faction in Incheon that was growing bold in ways that needed to be addressed. Hwan-jin spoke little. He never needed to speak much. His presence was its own language, and everyone in the room was fluent. What none of them said aloud, but what every person in that room understood, was that Seo Hwan-jin at 60% capacity, shoulder impaired, the arm that had once moved with a speed that had become legend now subject to a stiffness that the wrong eyes could read as weakness, was still the most dangerous person in the room. But they were watching. They were all watching in the way that men who have spent their lives reading power always watch the thing at the center, not with open aggression, but with the patient assessment of predators who have learned that patience is more efficient than speed. He felt it. He had always felt it. It was part of the work of being what he was, the constant monitoring of every room, every face, every shift in weight that signaled a change in someone's calculation. But midway through the meeting, one of the men, Young Dae-ho, broad-shouldered, silver-templed, with the smile of someone who had learned that smiling disarms people, let a comment slip that was not quite accidental. "I hear the boss has a new therapist," Young Dae-ho said, refilling his own glass. A foreign woman. Silence. Hwan-jin did not move, did not blink, did not alter the angle of his gaze by a single degree. "A rehabilitation specialist," he said, "for the shoulder injury." "Of course." Young Dae-ho smiled. "Only practical. A boss who cannot move his arm at full capacity is a liability. We all understand." The last sentence was the one that mattered. Hwan-jin heard it the way he always heard such things, beneath the words, inside the shape of them, in the space between what was said and what was meant. A boss who cannot move his arm at full capacity is a liability. The other two men at the table said nothing, neither confirming nor denying, which was itself a position. Hwan-jin looked at each of them once, briefly, and saw in their careful blankness the same thing he saw in Young Dae-ho's smile. Not loyalty. Calculation. The assessment running continuously in every mind in this world. How much longer, and what comes after? He filed it. He continued the meeting. He smiled once, briefly, when the situation called for it, and the men across the table visibly relaxed, because his smile was the thing they feared most. Not his anger. His anger meant something was about to happen to someone else. His smile meant they could not be certain. After the meeting, Rojin fell into step beside him in the corridor. "Young Dae-ho is testing," Rojin said quietly. "He has been testing for 6 months," Hwan-jin replied. "He is simply growing less patient." "Should I?" "Not yet." Hwan-jin paused at the end of the corridor, looking out at the city below. "But watch him. Watch who he is talking to. And make sure nothing about the rehabilitation sessions leaves this building." Rojin nodded. "And the specialist herself?" Hwan-jin was quiet for a moment. The city below moved the way it always moved, indifferent and continuous, thousands of lives intersecting and diverging and meaning nothing to each other. He thought about a woman who moved slowly and breathed audibly and had said, in their first real conversation, that she had spent 8 years in trauma rehabilitation and knew the difference between pain hiding as danger and actual danger. He had not expected her to continue knowing that difference once the reality of his world became clearer to her. Most people's perception shifted quickly when they understood what he was. Hers had not shifted. "She is not involved in this world," he said. "She stays that way." It was the most protective he had sounded about a person in 13 years. Rojin noted that too. Thursday arrived. Loveth came with a new set of exercises. She also came with a question that she held for 20 minutes before she asked it, because she had learned that timing was everything with him. If she asked too early, before the session had settled his defenses down, he would shut the question out entirely. If she asked during, he might answer from a place he had not consciously chosen. If she asked at the right moment, after the breath work, before the movement exercises, when he was in the particular suspended state that rehabilitation created, she had the best chance of an honest answer. She waited for that moment. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. He was sitting with his eyes half closed, hands loose on his knees. "You already decided you were going to ask it." "I did," she agreed. "But I'm still asking permission." A pause. "Ask." "The night it happened. The night your brother died." She kept her voice level. Clinical, but not cold. Warm, but not pitying. The balance was the hardest thing she had ever learned to maintain. "Were you there when it started? Or did you arrive after?" The quality of the silence changed. She watched him without watching him. The peripheral tracking that trauma-informed therapists learned, the skill of observing without making. The subject feel observed. His jaw moved slightly. His right hand, the one connected to the injured shoulder, curled once and then released. "I was there when it started," he said. "Okay." "My brother was standing 3 meters to my left." A pause. "He should have been behind me. I had told him to stay behind me." Loveth said nothing. This was important. The silence after a disclosure was not a void to fill. It was a container. She let it hold. He did not listen. Hwan-jin continued, and his voice had something in it now that she had not heard before. Not grief exactly. Something older than grief. Something that grief turns into after 13 years without proper outlet. He never listened. He was 22. He thought being my brother made him untouchable. "And you believe that too," Loveth said softly. Before that night, Hwan-jin's eyes opened fully. He looked at her. She held his gaze. "Yes," he said finally. "I believe that too." It was the most honest thing he had said to another human being in over a decade. Loveth made a note in her tablet. Then she looked back up at him. When someone we love dies because they trusted our protection, she said, the body keeps the guilt. It stores it in the muscles. It makes physical closeness feel like a threat because closeness is where the loss lives. Your shoulder is not just an injury, Hwan-jin. It is where your guilt decided to live. He stared at her for a long time. You say these things very directly, he said. Would you prefer I dance around them? No. He said it immediately, which surprised him. I have had enough of people dancing around things. Then I'll keep being direct. She set the tablet down. Let's do the movement sequence. And this time, I want you to breathe through the resistance instead of fighting it. Every time it hurts, breathe into it. He moved through the sequence. He breathed. And somewhere in the middle of the 7th repetition, without planning it, he said, her name was Ji-ho. Loveth looked at him. My brother. His name was Ji-ho. She paused the exercise. She looked at him with full attention, the kind that costs something to give. Tell me about him, she said. And Seo Hwan-jin, who had not spoken his dead brother's name aloud in 13 years, who had built an empire on the foundation of a grief he refused to acknowledge, who had turned his inability to be touched into a mythology that kept the world at arm's length. He talked. He talked for 40 minutes. Loveth listened for all of it. She should not have looked in the cabinet. She knew that. She had arrived early for the Friday check-in session. Seo had miscommunicated the time and had been shown to the rehabilitation room to wait. She had sat for 10 minutes. Then, because she was Loveth Okafor and she had never been the kind of person who sat quietly when there was a bookshelf to examine, she stood and began to browse. The rehabilitation room was deliberately sparse. Hwan-jin had permitted her to set it up according to her specifications. Mats, resistance equipment, a portable sound system. But against the east wall, there was a cabinet that had always been locked. Always, until today, when she noticed the door slightly ajar. She should not have looked. But she did. Inside, beneath a row of physical therapy manuals that had never been opened, was a file. Thin, brown, old enough that the paper had developed the particular yellow of age. She pulled it out. The tab on the file read, Operation White Crane, Witness Records, Classified. She should have put it back. She opened it instead. The first page was a summary of a 2011 incident. An ambush in the Gangnam district. She recognized the date immediately. It was the night Ji-ho Seo had died. The night Hwan-jin's world had fractured. She turned to the second page. Her eyes moved down the list of witness names. And then they stopped. They stopped on a name that she knew as well as her own. A name that had no business being in a classified file about a Korean Mafia ambush in a city she had not visited until 3 months ago. Okafor Emmanuel C. Her father's name. Her father, who had been a diplomat attached to the Nigerian consulate in Seoul from 2009 to 2013. Her father, who had died of a heart attack in 2018 and who had never, not once, mentioned anything about witnessing a criminal incident in South Korea. Her father, whose name was in a file that was in a cabinet in the private rehabilitation room of a Korean Mafia boss. Loveth stood very still. She heard footsteps in the corridor. She put the file back exactly as she had found it, including the angle of the cover and the position of the corner that had been slightly bent. She moved back to her chair. She sat down. She picked up her tablet. She arranged her face into the expression of a woman who had been waiting patiently and found nothing of interest in the wait. When Hwan-jin entered, she smiled at him. You're early, he said. Seo-jin's watch is running fast, she replied. Shall we begin? She did not tell him. Not that session. Not the one after. She went home that night and sat on the floor of her apartment in Mapo district while her best friend Zakura ate chin-chin from a plastic bag and watched her with the careful eyes of someone who knew that Loveth's silence was never empty. Say it, Zakura said. I found something, Loveth replied. In the Mafia man's house. In his rehabilitation room. In a file I had no business reading. Zakura put down the chin-chin. This was serious. Zakura did not put down food for small things. What did you find? Loveth told her. All of it. Her father's name. The date. The ambush. The classified label on a file that had no reason to be where she found it. Zakura was quiet for a long time after. Loveth, she said carefully. I know. Your father was a diplomat. A clean one. Everyone said so. I know. So either someone put his name in that file falsely, Or your father saw something in Seoul that he carried to his grave without telling a single soul. Sakura picked the chin-chin back up. Stress required fuel. Both of those options are terrifying. I know that too. So what are you going to do? Loveth looked at her hands. The hands that had, 3 days ago, rested against the shoulder of a man who hadn't allowed another human being to touch him in 13 years. The hands that had felt, in that released exhale, something shifting in the deep bedrock of a person. I'm going to keep treating him, she said. And I'm going to find out what that file means. Without telling him. A long pause. Without telling him yet, she said. She was meticulous about it. She made copies of the file on the next opportunity. Another early arrival. Another slightly open cabinet that she suspected was not accidental, though she could not have said why. She sent the copies to her personal encrypted cloud. She reached out, carefully, to a contact in Lagos who had access to Nigerian diplomatic archives. And while she did all of this, she continued the sessions. The sessions that were, by now, something she looked forward to in a way that she was beginning to find difficult to justify as purely professional. Hwan-jin had started talking more. Not about operations, not about the world that existed outside this room. She understood instinctively that asking about that world would end everything, but about smaller things. Jiho's laugh. The way their mother used to fold rice differently from anyone else he had ever known. The book he had been reading when Rojin first walked into his life and pledged an allegiance that had never once wavered. He asked her questions too, tentative at first. Calibrating. Why rehabilitation? He asked one Tuesday, when she was working on the range of motion in his arm and the rain was doing what it seemed to love doing in this penthouse. My mother had a stroke when I was 19, she said. Right side. Significant. The rehabilitation specialist who worked with her, he gave my mother back to herself. 3 years of work and she was gardening again. Playing the keyboard. She paused. I wanted to do that for people. Give them back to themselves. Hwan-jin considered this. And you believe everyone can be given back to themselves? I believe everyone deserves the attempt. Another pause. His arm moved through the resistance. He breathed the way she had taught him. Even men like me? He asked. Loveth looked at him directly. Especially men like you. Because the wreckage is louder. And the quiet on the other side would be so much more powerful. He looked at her. She looked back. The rain shifted direction against the window. Neither of them moved for a moment that lasted long enough to become something neither of them named. Then she said, again. Same movement. He did it again. The message from her Lagos contact came on a Wednesday night. Loveth read it 3 times before she trusted what she was seeing. Emmanuel Okafor had been a formal witness to the Gangnam incident. Not accidentally, not tangentially. He had been present because he had been warned. Someone had contacted the Nigerian consulate 48 hours before the ambush with information about a planned hit. Her father had gone, against protocol and without informing his superiors, to observe, to confirm, perhaps to intervene. He had seen the whole thing. He had seen who orchestrated it. And according to the archive record her contact had located, he had filed a private testimony that had been sealed and never submitted to any authority, at the request of a Korean national named Han Seo-yun. Loveth sat with this information for a very long time. Han Seo-yun. The name appeared in the few things Hwan-jin had said about his past, said obliquely, the way people speak about wounds they have accepted as permanent. His former fiancée. The woman who had disappeared after the ambush. The woman the underworld assumed had fled in grief. She had not fled in grief. She had orchestrated the ambush that killed Jiho. She had arranged the cover. She had found a foreign diplomat who had seen too much and convinced him, or coerced him, into silence and sealed testimony. And then she had disappeared. Until now. Because the second attachment in her contact's message was a recent photograph, time-stamped 4 weeks ago, taken in the Yongsan district of Seoul. Han Seo-yun had come back. Loveth put her phone face down on the table. She pressed her fingers against her temples. She thought about her father. About what it must have cost him to carry that silence for 7 years until his heart gave out. She thought about whether the weight of it had contributed to that giving out, whether secrets, held long enough, became physiological. She thought about Hwan-jin. She had to tell him. She did not know how. She told him on a Thursday. Not in the session. After it, when they had reached the specific quiet that followed his exercises, the window in his emotional defenses that she had come to recognize as the place where truth could enter without triggering collapse. I have to tell you something, she said. And I need you to let me finish before you respond. He looked at her with complete attention. This was one of the things about him that had surprised her early and continued to unsettle her in the best possible way. When Seo Hwan-jin gave you his attention, he gave all of it. No part of him was elsewhere. I found a file, she said. In the cabinet. The one that was left open. A pause. Something moved through his expression. She could not fully read it. She continued. She told him everything. Her father's name. The sealed testimony. The contact in Lagos. The photograph from Yongsan. She told him Han Seo-yun was back in Seoul. She watched his face during all of it and saw something she had not expected. Not rage. She had braced for rage, had her clinical tools ready to help him contain it and process it and not let it consume the progress they had made. What she saw instead was stillness. The absolute, terrible stillness of a man receiving a truth that he had, on some level, already suspected. When she finished, the room was silent. You were not supposed to find that file, he said. I know. I was not ready to discuss it. I know that too. She met his eyes. But someone else already knows what's in it. And whoever left that cabinet open, I don't think it was an accident. He absorbed this. She watched him think, the way she had learned to watch him think, not interrupting the processing, not rushing toward resolution. Seo-yun, he said. Just the name. The way you say the name of something that shaped you, that you have had to build an entire life around not being destroyed by. She didn't leave, he said. After Ji-ho, it was not a question anymore. It was a rearrangement of a story he had been telling himself for 13 years. I thought she left because she couldn't survive the grief. I let myself think that. It was easier. Hwan-jin. She arranged it. His jaw tightened. She killed my brother to take. He stopped. He breathed the way she had taught him. 1 breath. 2. She wanted the empire. My family's position. And she knew that with Ji-ho alive, I would choose him over the organization eventually. He was the reason I kept considering a way out. Loveth sat very still. Ji-ho was the weakness, Hwan-jin continued. In her calculation. Remove the weakness. Break me. Keep me isolated and controllable. But you weren't controllable, Loveth said quietly. No. I fell apart in a different direction than she intended. He looked at her. And she disappeared before she could course correct. A long pause. And now she is back, he said. Yes. Because of you. Loveth held that. Because of the progress. Because something is changing. Someone is watching these sessions. Young Dae-ho, maybe, or someone working with him. And word got to her. She came back because she sees an opportunity. Hwan-jin looked at her for a long moment. You are not just a rehabilitation specialist, he said. I am exactly a rehabilitation specialist, she replied, who has also spent 3 years working in conflict and post-conflict zones where understanding the political landscape was a survival skill. Your father taught you that. She paused. Yes. Something in his expression shifted. Not softer exactly. Deeper. Your father tried to help, he said. I think so. He died carrying it. Yes. They looked at each other across the space of everything that had just been said. I am sorry, Hwan-jin said. He said it very simply, without ornamentation, the way a person says a true thing when they have finally run out of reasons to dress it up. Loveth felt it land in her chest and stay there. So am I, she said. Rojin's response, when Hwan-jin told him that night, was to go very quiet, and then to place both palms flat on the desk and breathe once through his nose. I should have found this years ago, he said. You did not have the Nigerian connection, Hwan-jin replied. No one did. Where is she staying? Find out. But carefully. I do not want her to know that we know. Rojin nodded. And Loveth. She stays in the sessions. Normal schedule. If Seo-yun is watching, and she is, any deviation signals that we have information. Hwan-jin paused. And Rojin. Her safety becomes your priority. Rojin looked at his boss with the expression of a man who had waited 19 years to hear him say something like that about another person. Understood, he said. What none of them anticipated was the speed of it. Seo-yun moved faster than calculation because she was afraid. And afraid people with resources are the most dangerous kind. 3 days after Loveth's disclosure, when Hwan-jin and Rojin were still building their response strategy, it happened. Loveth left the penthouse at 7:45 in the evening. The driver Hwan-jin always assigned to her was 11 minutes late because of a route blocked by an accident on the Mapo Bridge. 11 minutes. That was the window. She was 2 blocks from the lobby when the car pulled up. It was not a rough grab. It was precise, professional, the kind of extraction that took planning and rehearsal and someone who had done this before. A cloth over her face before she could call out. The door closing. The car moving. All of it in under 40 seconds. Sakura had been calling her at 8:15 when she hadn't arrived home, and by 8:30 she had sent a message to the number Hwan-jin had given her when he had, 2 weeks ago, quietly and without explanation, told her, "If anything ever feels wrong, send to this number first." Sakura sent to the number at 8:31. By 8:32, the penthouse was a different kind of building. When Hwan-jin received the message, he was standing in his study holding a glass of water. He set the glass down very carefully. He looked at Hwan-jin. Hwan-jin was already on his phone. Hwan-jin said nothing. He walked to the wardrobe in the adjoining room. He dressed in a specific way, the way he had not dressed in a long time. The way that meant he was not going to a meeting. He was not going to negotiate. He did not pause to plan in the meticulous way he usually planned, laying out every contingency, mapping every variable. He moved with a directness that was different from strategy. It was something older and more animal, something he had not felt since he was 26, and someone was taking something from him that he would never get back. This time he was not 26. This time he was not powerless. His shoulder ached. He breathed into it. Loveth had taught him that. He was going. They found the location inside 40 minutes. Hwan-jin's network was old and loyal and moved like water through the cracks of Seoul's underworld. An abandoned processing facility in the industrial stretch beyond Gimpo. The kind of place that had 12 exits and 4 heat signatures when the drone pass confirmed it. Hwan-jin looked at the layout. He counted the signatures. "She is in the back," Hwan-jin said quietly, reading from the thermal data. "One person with her. Stationary. The other 3 are mobile. They are keeping a perimeter pattern. Rotation every 4 minutes. Seo Hwan. Upper level. Alone." Hwan-jin paused. "She wants you to come. She is expecting you." "I know. This is a trap, Hwan-jin. I know that too." He handed the layout back. "Left flank. My people." Hwan-jin looked at him. "And you?" "Center." A pause. "Your shoulder." "Will manage." He looked at his right-hand man. "I have been breathing into resistance for 3 weeks. I was told it helps." Hwan-jin looked at him for a moment with an expression that 19 years of partnership had given him the language to read. Grief and love, and the particular relief of watching someone choose to live in the full sense of the word. For minutes between rotations, Hwan-jin said, "Do not be slow." "I am never slow." He moved. The first 2 men at the perimeter were handled quickly. Hwan-jin's people on the left flank. Hwan-jin through the center. Because no matter what the injury had cost him these past months, Seo Hwan-jin was still, muscle memory and muscle trauma notwithstanding, extraordinarily dangerous. He moved through the facility the way water moves, finding every path, filling every gap. He took a hit to the right side near the second corridor. He breathed through it. He kept moving. He passed through a room that smelled like industrial solvent and rust and old machinery, and he thought, with the strange lateral clarity that came with adrenaline, about a room that smelled like cedarwood and antiseptic and something quieter beneath. He thought about what it had meant to sit in that room twice a week and be seen by someone who was not afraid. He moved faster. Han Seo-yun had set this up as a trap. She had expected him to come. She had prepared for a confrontation. She had not prepared for the version of him that walked through her door. The version who had been breathing into resistance for 3 weeks. Who had spoken Jiho's name aloud for the first time and let it be a name instead of a wound. Who had felt someone's hand on his shoulder and exhaled instead of exploded. Who had told a woman about his dead brother for 40 minutes and felt the telling as relief rather than further damage. She had prepared for the frozen man. The man who could not be touched. She had not prepared for the man who was learning how to be human again. Loveth was in the back room, wrists bound, a bruise forming on her left cheekbone where she had been shoved against a wall during the transfer. She was angry. She was frightened. She was also, with the portion of her mind that never fully stopped working, cataloging everything. The number of people she could hear, the timing of their movement patterns, the door that opened on a hinge that needed oiling. She thought about her father. She had been thinking about her father a great deal since finding the file. About the specific kind of weight that a secret carries when you carry it alone, with nowhere to set it down. Emmanuel Okafor had been, In her memory and in everyone else's memory who had known him, a gentle man. Thoughtful. The kind of person who remembered what you had been worried about 3 months ago and asked after it, unprompted. The kind of person who read to his daughters on Sunday mornings in a voice that made the words feel slower and more permanent than they did in anyone else's mouth. He had also been, apparently, a man who had witnessed the murder of a young man and been convinced, or coerced, into silence. Who had carried that knowledge through 7 years of his remaining life without once letting his daughters see it. Without once allowing the weight to show. She was angry at him for it. She was also, in the same breath, so achingly proud of the attempt to protect her from it that she could barely hold both feelings simultaneously without something in her chest going tight. She shifted her position, testing the binding. Zip ties. Newer material, tighter technique. The person who had done this had done it before. She heard the commotion start from the outer corridors. She heard it move inward. The sounds were specific, contained, deliberate, not the scattered noise of chaos. The purposeful sound of someone moving through resistance with a plan. She had spent enough time in conflict zones to know the difference. She heard the door, and then it opened, and Hwan-jin was standing in it. He looked at her the way no one had ever looked at her, the way a person looks at something that, in the exact moment of nearly losing it, they finally understand they cannot live without. His face held everything he never said aloud, and several things she suspected he had not yet permitted himself to know. He crossed the room in 4 steps. He knelt in front of her. His hands moved to the binding at her wrists. She looked at his shoulder. "You're going to feel that tomorrow," she said. His hands paused. He looked up at her. "That is your immediate response," he said. "After being kidnapped, you are concerned about my shoulder. I am always concerned about your shoulder. It's literally my job." She paused. "Also, you're bleeding slightly. Right side. It is not significant. I'll determine that." She held his eyes. "Hwan-jin, I'm okay. Finish what you're doing." He looked at her for one more second with everything in his face that he did not say. Then he freed her wrists. And then he did not pull back the way he always pulled back. He did not calculate the distance. He did not manage the moment from behind the glass of 13 years of learned self-protection. He pulled her toward him. His arms went around her. She felt him breathe. She felt the quality of it. The same quality as that first exhale 3 weeks ago, when she had pressed her fingers to his shoulder and something had released. Except this time it was not a point in his shoulder. It was his whole body. It was the letting go of something he had been holding since he was 26 years old and standing over his brother's body thinking that touch had failed and would therefore be forfeited. That if closeness was where you lost people, then closeness was a luxury you could not afford. He had spent 13 years affording nothing. Loveth put her hand against his back. She held on. He did not flinch. He did not pull away. He held her in an abandoned warehouse in industrial Seoul while his right-hand man dismantled the trap around them. And outside the rain was doing what Seoul rain always did. And somewhere in the building Han Seo-yun was making the calculation that she had, in the end, miscalculated entirely. Han Seo-yun was cornered in the upper office of the facility. She was, even in this moment, immaculate. That was one of the things about her that had always been unnerving. She maintained composure the way some people maintain debt, structurally, at great cost, visible only in what it required from everything else. She had been beautiful when he loved her. She was still beautiful now, in the way that certain dangerous things are beautiful, the way a fire is beautiful before it takes a building down. She stood with her back to the desk, hands relaxed at her sides, her expression carrying the particular brand of controlled calm that Hwan-jin recognized as someone who had prepared this version of herself for exactly this moment. She had always prepared. He used to admire that. She faced Hwan-jin across the office. Rojin stood at the door. 2 of their people were at the windows. "You came for her," Seo said. Not accusatory. Almost curious. Analytical to the end. 13 years, and you didn't come for me when I left. You didn't come for anyone. But you came for her. "I came for the truth," Hwan-jin said. "The truth." She smiled. It was a practiced smile. "The truth is that you were never going to lead what your family built. You were too sentimental. Jiho was the anchor around your neck. I removed the anchor." The room was very quiet. Everything became very still. "Jiho was the reason I had anything worth leading," Hwan-jin said. "Sentiment. Love." He said the word without apology, without performance. It was simply the true word for the thing he was describing. You spent 13 years learning to run a rival operation without understanding the one thing that makes any of this worth anything. He paused. You saw weakness in everything that was actually strength. His loyalty, his trust, his belief that I would protect him. Seo Yun's composure shifted by the smallest degree. And the foreign woman, she said. What is she to you? He looked at her without hesitation. None of your concern. She made you weak. I saw it from the outside and I knew. The moment she walked into your building, the moment you let her near you, that you were opening a door that I thought I had closed permanently. She made me present, he said. You saw what you were looking for. You always did. He stepped once toward her. And now you are going to face consequences for what you did. For Jiho. For Loveth's father. For what happened tonight. Seo Yun looked at him for a long moment. And beneath the control, beneath the composure, Hwan-jin saw the thing she could not finally mask. The recognition that she had understood him entirely wrong. You're different, she said finally. Yes, he agreed. He left the rest of the consequences to Rojin. He had other things to attend to. What happened after was not cinematic. It was paperwork and meetings and the careful, methodical work of dismantling a rival structure and presenting its architects to the underground tribunal that governed such things. Young Daeho's connection to Seo Yun was established within 2 weeks. He had been her information source, her eyes inside Hwan-jin's operations. He had believed, incorrectly, that she would share power once she had it. He had believed many things incorrectly. The power structure shifted, the way they always shifted, slowly, then suddenly, with aftershocks that took months to fully map. Men who had aligned with Young Daeho recalibrated quickly. A few did not recalibrate fast enough and faced the consequences of being slow. The ones who remained found that Seo Hwan-jin, having passed through a period that the underworld had categorized as weakness, was something qualitatively different on the other side. Not softer, clearer. The difference between a man who leads from fear of losing and a man who leads from understanding what he is protecting. Hwan-jin managed all of it. And twice a week, in the penthouse rehabilitation room that smelled like cedar wood and something quieter beneath, he showed up for his sessions. His shoulder improved steadily. The range of motion returned in increments, 2 degrees 1 week, 5 the next, the gradual reclamation of a body from the grip of years-old grief. He began to sleep better. He told Loveth this, and she made a note in her tablet without making a production of it, which he continued to appreciate. The bruise on her cheekbone faded within 10 days. He noticed when it was gone. She noticed him noticing. Neither of them said anything about it directly, because they had developed a fluency in the things that did not need to be said. What did get said, in pieces, over several sessions, was everything that the past 3 months had carried. She told him more about her father, not the revelation, but the man. The particular way Emmanuel Okafor had moved through the world, the gentleness he had carried, the love he had given his daughters in a language that was partly words and partly the specific act of paying attention. Hwan-jin listened the way she had trained him to listen, without trying to fix, without moving toward resolution, just holding space for the shape of a loss. In return, without planning it, he told her more about Jiho, about the arguments they had had in the last year of Jiho's life, the ones that had seemed so significant at the time, about whether Hwan-jin was embedding too deeply in the organization, about whether there was still a version of their lives that looked different from this one. Jiho had believed there was. Jiho had been 22 and full of belief the way only people who have not yet lost enough can be. Do you think he was right? Loveth asked one afternoon. Not clinically. Genuinely. Hwan-jin was quiet for a moment. I think he saw something I had stopped being willing to see, he said finally. A door I had decided was closed. He kept pointing at it. A pause. He was annoying about it, actually. Relentless. Loveth smiled. That sounds, she said, like someone who loved you. Hwan-jin looked at her. Something in his expression was unguarded in a way that he would have managed 3 months ago. He let it be unguarded. Yes, he said. It does. One evening, 6 weeks after the night in the warehouse, she sat across from him after a session and said, I've been thinking about staying. He was quiet. In Seoul. Long term. She looked at her hands. There's a need here. Trauma rehabilitation. Particularly for people in complicated situations who have no access to legitimate services. She looked up. I've been talking to Rojin about a structure for it. Rojin. He approves of me. she said simply. Something moved through Hwan-jin's face that was very close to warmth. He approves of very few people, he said. I know. He told me the list. It has 4 names on it. She paused. I'm number 2. Who is number 1? You. He looked at her. You should not read too much into that. He is loyal. He would include me regardless. He said the same thing about you, including him. She tilted her head. He also said that when I called about the warehouse, you moved faster than he had ever seen you move toward anything. Hwan-jin said nothing. Loveth said nothing either for a moment. I want to open a center, she said. Formal. Professional. For trauma survivors who have no one. I want to build something that lasts. In Seoul. In Seoul. A pause. I thought, if you were willing, that you might want to be involved. Quietly. In whatever capacity felt right. He looked at her for a long time. My name cannot be on anything public, he said. I know that. My involvement must remain behind the structure. I know that too. Loveth. His voice shifted. Dropped to the register she had come to associate with the moments when he said things that cost him something. She waited. Why are you still here, he asked. You found what you came for. Your father's name is cleared. The sealed testimony will be unsealed. Your contract ends next month. You could return to Lagos. To Enugu. To wherever is comfortable and safe and does not involve. He gestured, a gesture that encompassed the penthouse and the city below and the entire complicated architecture of the life she had walked into. Loveth looked at him. Do you want me to go? She asked. A long silence. No, he said. Then I'm not going. It was that simple and that enormous. The rehabilitation center opened 4 months later in a building in Yongsan that had good light and enough space for 3 treatment rooms and a waiting area that Zecora helped Loveth design, because Zecora had opinions about waiting areas. Loveth named it after her father. Emmanuel Center. Trauma Recovery and Rehabilitation. The opening was attended by 12 people. 3 former clients. 2 peer specialists Loveth had trained. Hwan-jin, who appeared briefly, shook Loveth's hand, said 3 words she would remember for a long time, and left. Hwan-jin was not there. His name was not on anything. There was no visible connection between the feared Mafia boss of 3 districts and the small, well-lit rehabilitation center in Yongsan. But the building's security was flawless. The staff salaries were funded through 3 layers of legitimate structures that Hwan-jin had established with the kind of legal precision that suggested he had been planning this for longer than the 4 months since the idea was proposed. And on the day the center opened, Loveth received a single message. No name. No explanation. Only, Jiho would have liked this. She stood in the doorway of the Emmanuel Center and looked at it for a long time. Then she went inside to do the work. The last scene between them happened on an ordinary evening in early spring. The shoulder had almost fully healed. She was seeing him once a week now, maintenance sessions, the kind that were as much about sustaining progress as continuing it. They both knew the formal rehabilitation arc was approaching its conclusion. They both pretended not to think about what that meant. They were outside, on the terrace of a restaurant in Insadong that Hwan-jin had a quiet ownership stake in. The city was audible, but not intrusive. The evening had that particular quality of soul and spring, slightly uncertain, the way the city held its breath between seasons. They had eaten. They had talked about nothing significant. They had not talked about the thing that was there between them like weather, present, and unmistakable. Then Loveth set down her cup. I need to tell you something, she said. He looked at her. He had learned to look at her the way she had taught him to breathe, fully, without managing the result. When I took this job, she said, I expected a difficult patient. I did not expect, she paused. She, who was never at a loss for the right clinical language, searched for words that were not clinical. I did not expect to find someone who changed the way I understand what healing actually means. Hwan-jin was quiet. You taught me, he said. You taught me back, she said. About what it takes. About the kind of courage that nobody sees. About, she stopped. He reached across the table. It was slow, deliberate, the way everything he did now was deliberate. Chosen rather than reactive, present rather than defended. His hand crossed the space between them and rested on hers. A simple touch. His hand over hers on the table of a restaurant in Insadong on an evening in spring in the city where both of them had, for different reasons and through different paths, arrived at the same improbable moment. Loveth looked down at their hands. Then she looked up at him. How does it feel, she asked. The question had layers. He understood all of them. He looked at her with the full, unheld attention that was the thing she had fallen for before she had a name for falling. Like something I did not know I was waiting for, he said. She turned her hand over and held his. He did not pull away. Around them, Seoul continued to be Seoul, loud and layered and indifferent and extraordinary. Somewhere in Yongsan, the Emmanuel Center was dark for the night, its rooms quiet and waiting. Somewhere, Rojin was managing whatever needed managing. Somewhere, the world that Hwan-jin had built on grief and survival and the absence of touch was slowly, irrevocably reconfiguring itself around something new. And here, at a table in Insadong, a man who had not been touched in 13 years held a woman's hand in public for the first time. A simple touch. The most impossible thing. The most human thing. The thing that meant everything. If this story moved you the way I believe it did, please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support means more than you know, and it helps stories like this reach the people who need them most. Drop a comment below and tell me, which moment hit you the hardest? The warehouse? The terrace? The first time he exhaled? I read every single one. Share this with someone who loves a story about healing and love and the kind of courage nobody talks about enough. I will see you in the next one.